Hi, third grade. I'm ready to read you chapter 2 of Rowan of Rin. But before I read that chapter, I'm going to randomly open this book just to a poem so we could hear some poetry also. And Seamus says, stop now. Okay, whoa, Seamus picked the big one. The bagpipe. Look at that poem. The bagpipe who didn't say no. It was 9 o'clock at midnight at a quarter past... Let's start that again. It was 9 o'clock at midnight at a quarter after 3 when a turtle met a bagpipe on the shore by the sea. And the turtle said, "My dearie, may I sit with you? I'm weary." And the bagpipe didn't say no. Said the turtle to the bagpipe, "I've walked this lonely shore. I've talked to waves and pebbles, but I've never loved before. Will you marry me today, dear?" "Is it no you're going to say, dear?" But the bagpipe didn't say no. Said the turtle to his darling, "Please excuse me if I stare. You've the plattest skin, dear, and you have the strangest hair. If I begged you pretty please, love, could I give you just one squeeze, love?" And the bagpipe didn't say no. Said the turtle to the bagpipe, "Ah, you love me, then confess. Let me whisper in your dainty ear and hold you to my chest." And he cuddled her and teased her, and so lovingly he squeezed her. And the bagpipe said, "Auga." And said the turtle to the bagpipe, "Did you honk or bray or neigh? For a ooga when you're kissed is such a heartless thing to say. Is it that I have offended? Is it that our love is ended?" And the bagpipe didn't say no. Said the turtle to the bagpipe, "Shall I leave you, darling wife? Shall I waddle off to woedom? Shall I crawl out of your life? Shall I move, depart, and go, dear? Oh, I beg you tell me no, dear." But the bagpipe didn't say no. So the turtle crept off crying, and never came back no more. And he left the bagpipe lying on that smooth and sandy shore. And some night when the tide is low there, just walk up and say hello there, and politely ask the bagpipe if this story is really so. I assure you, darling children, that the bagpipe won't say no. And this guy's poems are kind of odd sometimes, almost always. And I like to read odd things. That just reminds you, when you write poems, you can write about anything and write in any way. His barely even rhyme. Chapter 2, Rowan of Rin by Emily Rodda. I'll read the last part that I read before just so we can catch up. "Go along," Rowan Giller urged in a whisper. "Do as you're bid, at once." Rowan scuttled through the crowd. "He's scared of his shadow, that boy," he heard Val the miller mutter to her brother as he passed them. "He'll never be the man his father was." Ellis grunted in agreement. Rowan ran on, his cheeks burning with shame. Rowan was panting when he reached the cool house. Trembling, he climbed the ladder and took the 2 oldest cheeses from their shelf. The cool house was packed with cheeses, vats of smooth white milk curds, churns of butter, plenty for everyone, but not for long if new supplies did not replace the old, because remember, the bookshaw, if they don't have water, they can't produce milk, and then they won't get all this food. And obviously these people make a lot of their food from the animals. He left the cool house and he hurried toward the orchard to which lay Sheba's hut. He could hear the sound of the crowd still assembled in the market square, and he was glad that he didn't have to pass them on the way. And as he reached the outskirts of the village, he thought about what Val had said. Stumbling slightly in the ragged green grass, he began moving through the hoopberry trees, dodging the twisted hanging branches, and he thought of Sefton, his father. Sefton had come home from the market late one night just after Anad was born to find his house burning. A log had rolled off the fire and set the ground floor on fire, and flames were licking the staircase, and the house was filled with smoke. Sefton had shouted for help, and then he leapt up the burning stairs, and he had pulled the unconscious Giller and the new baby from their beds and carried them down to safety. And as the flames burned higher and hotter, he threw a blanket around his head, and he went back into the house for Rowan in the attic. No one could stop him. they said later, though the heat and the smoke beat everyone else back, even the giant millers, Val and Ellis, even strong John, Sefton's friend. They saw Sefton at the attic window with Rowan in his arms, and they saw him fling the window open and heard him cry out, and they rushed to catch what he threw to them, his son screaming in terror, tightly wrapped in the rug from his bed. And then they heard a crash, and they saw that the roof fall in and the flames leap up and roar, and strong John, cradling Rowan in his huge arms, gave a shout of grief. And Sefton had saved his family, but he had gone from them forever. Rowan grew up knowing that his father had died to save him, and he knew too that although they never said so openly, many people in the village of Rin felt that the exchange had not been a fair one. The villagers were farmers and traders now, but they were descended from great warriors, and in their time when Rin was threatened, many of the older ones had fought to defend it. The War of the Plains was alive in their memories and recorded in dozens of volumes in the House of Books. The people of Rin were proud of their tradition of courage. At an early age, every village child learned to run, climb, jump, swim, and fight. Rowan had trained with the others, but he had never been very good at anything. He had always been small for his age, and he had always been shy, and since the night of the fire he had been even quieter and more nervous than before. Val was right, he thought. He would never be the man his father was, and neither would he have the strength of his mother, who since his father's death had worked harder, plowing the wheat fields with Star and planting and gathering the crop and taking it to the mill. Rowan had even been given the job of herding the buckshaw because it was easy. Tending the big, gentle beast needed no strong arm or great courage. Only once, years ago, had a keeper of the buckshaw come to grief, and a mine shaft into which she had fallen trying to save a wandering calf had been closed in long ago. A much smaller child than Rowan could have done the work, but he was allowed to remain with his beast, and for this he was grateful. It sounds like a pretty peaceful job, you just kind of hang out in the mountains by water and let the animals eat their grass. The buckshaw loved him, and they knew his voice, and they would look at him with their soft brown eyes, and they would nuzzle his hand when he was sad, as if they knew his troubles. And in returns he tried to make their lives comfortable, learning to cure their ills and treating their cuts and bruises just as his mother treated his, and combing burrs and prickles out of their woolly coats. And when the winter snows blew in the valley, he would bring the old and weak to shelter, for he knew that the freezing winds would kill them, and he could not bear to lose even one. And in the spring, when the blossoms of the orchards sweetened the air, he would run and play with the calves, and he'd carry them handfuls of new peas that he stole from the garden when no one was looking. Rowan listened, and he could hear the beasts now in their fields nearby shumbling and rumbling and snuffling to one another as the sun began to dip behind the mountain. He wished he was with them instead of tripping over his own feet in an orchard with his arms full of smelly cheeses and a head full of shameful fears. He scrambled through the fence that marked the orchard boundary, and his steps slowed as he saw the light flickering from Sheba's hut. Despite the coolness of the air, her door was open, and gigantic shadows wavered and crept on the strange pale grass that grew before it. He began to tremble again as he approached. Two of Bree and Hannah's children had once told him that Sheba could turn you into a fat slug if she chose, and they pointed to the slugs that they were picking from the cabbage leaves. These were all people once, they said. Look, that's our uncle Arthal there. We know him by the spot on his forehead. He gave the witch a rotten tomato in a bag that he traded for bellyache medicine. 1 rotten tomato in a bag of 20, and that's what she did to him. Goodbye, Uncle Arthal. Hello, Uncle Slug. Want to give him a kiss? And they pushed the writhing creature towards Rowan's mouth and hooted after him as he ran away. Rowan knew that they were teasing him. He knew it, but sometimes in bed at night, or if the buckshaw strayed, or he had to go near Sheba's hut to catch it, that children's story would come back to him, and he'd remember that slow, fat slug and the spot on its forehead, and he would shudder. Voices drifted out to meet him as he trod softly amongst the shadows on the grass. Strong John and Marley, and another voice, cracked and low, Sheba. The stream flows down from the mountain top above the clouds, she was saying. Under the earth and rock it flows to Rin. So you must climb the mountain to the very top, my fine friends, and none knows the secret way but Sheba. Her mocking laugh rang out. Rowan thought of putting the cheeses down on the doorstep and returning home, but as he stepped forward, a twig snapped under the toe of his boot. At last, Strong John's head popped out the door, and he put his arm around Rowan's back and propelled him inside. "The boy with the cheeses, our gift to you, Sheba," he said heartily, "in trade for your knowledge of the way." The old woman, sitting by the fire, sniffed the air and smacked her lips with a greedy sound. "The cheeses," she gloated, and then she frowned, and her eyes narrowed. "Bring them here," she ordered. "Closer, boy." Rowan hesitated. Marley, beside him, gave him a little push. His feet felt like stones. He forced them forward, a step at a time. "What are you hiding?" snapped Sheba, half rising from her chair. "I said closer, boy. Come here and put these famous cheeses in my lap, for how do I know that I'm not being cheated, fobbed off with second-class goods?" "They're the best we have," Sheba said Marley. "Rowan chose them himself from the highest shelf in the cool house. You will like them." "So you say." Sheba scowled as she hunched under her shoulders and stared at Rowan, and in the firelight her eyes looked red. Her forehead was bound with a purple rag, and her hair hung like thin gray tails around her face. She smelled of ash and dust and old cloth and bitter herbs. Rowan reached her chair and placed the round yellow cheeses on her lap and backed swiftly away, holding his breath, trying not to look at her. But Sheba had lost interest in him. She was prodding the cheeses with her bony fingers and sniffing them one by one. Rowan hugged himself, shuddered, sheltering behind the tall figure of Marley, from whose terrible red eyes... Rowan hugged himself and shuddered, sheltering behind the tall figure of Marley from those terrible red eyes. What if he had chosen badly? What if the cheeses were no good after all? What if Sheba thought he was trying to trick her? The old woman looked up. "They are good," she pronounced. "As good as you said they would be, John of the Orchard." "Naturally," Strong John said, and bowed to her. "Now, Sheba," said Marley firmly, "will you tell us what we wish to know?" "Ah, brave Marley!" and Sheba giggled unpleasantly. She took some sticks from a basket beside her and threw them on the fire, and it flared up as the sticks caught alight and shadows danced on her face as she turned back to them. "Brave as you weave your cloth safe at home and dream of glory, but how brave will you be when you're on the mountain? The mountain has ways of taming big, brave girls like Marley, if they are so foolish to try their strength against it. It has ways, so many ways, as you will discover." Rowan felt Marley stiffen and saw her cheek begin to burn red. "We do not need your warnings, Sheba," she said in a level voice. "And John, Strong John, keeper of the trees, fine, tall man," jeered the old woman, ignoring her. "Now you come here to ask me favors. But what were you but a raggedy, bare-bottomed boy like all the rest once upon a time, crying for your mamma when Sheba passed by?" She bared her long brown teeth at him in a hideous grin. "The mountain will not test your strength, John. It will destroy it, as it has destroyed the strength of men with twice your courage. You will twist and blubber like a baby in the grip of the mountain, but the mountain will not let you go." There was a moment of silence, and Rowan was rigid with horror. Strong John laughed, and he planted his hands on his hips, and he addressed the old woman sternly. "Quit your tales, Sheba," he said. "They're wasted on me and Marley. The boy Rowan is the only one here to fear them. You should think not us so foolish as to follow his example. Look, you have scared him half to death, that poor skinny little rabbit. And he picked you such excellent cheeses, too. You should beg his pardon." Sheba went on grinning, but her eyes shone scarlet. "Laugh then, John of the Orchard," she sneered. "If the boy is the only one afraid, he is the only one of you who has sense. It would do you no harm to be guided by him," and she reached down into the basket beside her. "And so indeed I must beg his pardon," and she cackled, and then, fast as a striking snake, she threw a stick straight at Marley, who yelled and jumped aside in fright, leaving Rowan to take the full blow of the flying wood. Rowan stumbled back and nearly fell, and the stick clutched in his hand, and blood began to drip from a gash on his forehead. And Strong John exclaimed in anger and stepped forward with clenched fist. "A gift from Sheba," snarled the old woman, "and I do beg your pardon, Rowan of the Bookshaw." "Sheba, you go too far," thundered Strong John. Her lips curved. "Do I so?" she said. "Well then, perhaps this meeting should be ended. Not until you have told us what we came here for," cried Marley, and she glanced at Rowan cowering in the shadows. "And quickly, for the boy's forehead must be attended to." "It's only a scratch," said Sheba placidly, "but still, I grow weary, and I'm tired of your childishness. I will tell you what you need to know, as far as I am able. Wait." And she lay back in her chair, and half closed her eyes, and her hand stroked the cheeses in her lap as though they were cats. And the fire glowed, and she began to drone and mumble to herself for a long time until they could make no sense of her words, and then at once she spoke clearly. "7 hearts the journey make, 7 ways the heart will break. Bravest heart will carry on when sleep is death and hope is gone. Look in the fiery jaws of fear and see the answer white and clear. Then throw away all thoughts of home, for only then your quest is done." Sheba's eyelids fluttered and her eyes opened, and for a moment she stared blankly at John, Marley, and Rowan, as though wondering why they were there, and then her expression sharpened, and she waved her hand at them impatiently. She no longer looked like a witch. She just looked like a tired, crabby old woman. "Go now," she said. "I can tell you no more." "By the way, Sheba, the way we must go," urged Marley. "You must have told something." "You must have told us something." "Have I not? Well, we will see. Perhaps you will feel differently by and by. Now leave me in peace." Sheba's chin sank to his chest, and she was silent, and they waited, but she did not raise her head again, and after a while she began to snore. "She is asleep," whispered Rowan. "Asleep or pretending," said Strong John in disgust. "In any case, there's nothing more for us here. We must go back. The others have waited long enough for us." They left the hut, and they began to hurry toward the village. "And we return empty-handed," exclaimed Marley, "with Rowan bleeding. Rowan, I cannot forgive myself for stepping aside and leaving you to get struck. I was taken by surprise." "The old devil intended Rowan to suffer," said Strong John grimly. "She was punishing me for laughing at her and telling her to beg his pardon. The fault is mine." Rowan trotted along beside them through the orchard, feeling dizzy and faint, but whether this was because of the cut on his forehead or simply the tear he had felt in Sheba's cottage, he did not know. Her horrible warnings had whirled around in his head, and her strange, droning chant seemed to have been burned into his brain. He could not forget it. 7 hearts the journey make, 7 ways the hearts will break. He found himself repeating it under his breath, beating time and time his leg with the stick that he still carried in his hand. Bravest heart will carry on when sleep is death and hope is gone. "Put it out of your mind, boy Rowan," said Strong John uneasily. "Look ahead, the village lights. You will soon be home with your mother." He exchanged glances with Marley. "And what will she have to say to me for bringing him home in this state?" he added in an undertone. Chapter 3 is called Dun Dun, The Heroes. All right, kids. Thanks for joining me in class today. That was fun. Take care of each other. Until then.